brochure. Fantastic.
So, welcome to this 24th Midi de la Microfinance. It's always a good sign to see that we have a full house for this Midi. So, 24th session already. Microfinance as impact investing, but what is impact? Great question. That's one of the questions that we have asked ourselves in 2010 when we launched, together with a number of actors of the financial and NGO space in Luxembourg, EIIL, European Impact Investing Luxembourg, in order to organize the 2010 EVPA conference. Today, EIIL positions itself as a competence network of all actors willing to contribute their competencies to the development and innovation of impact investment industry. The competence network is today coordinated by ADA and open to all actors who would like to be involved in the theme and bring their skills and competencies to the discussion. On the other hand, ALFI has created a work group which is dedicated to impact investing, and impact investing is a strong theme within the responsible investing sphere. And I can already announce here that there will be a conference about responsible investing organized by ALFI on May 15th. One of the ideas which so far has been worked out by the EIIL Competence Network is the one of a legal framework for a so-called Société d'Impact Sociétal. And I will hand over right away to Marc Elvinger, who will tell us a little bit more about this project. Thank you.
Hello. Before saying just some words about this Société d'Impact Sociétal, I would like to say that I'm very happy about the title of today's conference or meeting, Microfinance as Impact Investing, but what impact? Now, of course, there is the what impact, and that still needs to be discussed. But for me, it's already important as such that with this title we are, if need be, reminded of the fact that the what, which is microfinance, always has to be considered with the what for. That is the impact, because that is what we are actually looking for. That means to make a difference. And that is the reason why I think it's a very good thing to look at microfinance as forming part of the broader concept of impact investing. And that is, of course, also why I have become quite active on the European Impact Investing Luxembourg platform, because I think it's important that we promote an approach in terms of impact first, rather than the more neutral and, to me, sometimes rather ambiguous concept of just the double bottom line without drawing clear priorities as to which of the two bottom lines has actually first rank. And I think with impact, the concept of impact investing, we are reminded of that. Now, on a much more, that's of course all about what it is for. On a much more technical level, we are indeed in the platform working on what I think to be an interesting project vehicle which should facilitate impact investing by allowing together in one single legal vehicle two types of investors, that is those who are only looking after impact and are not at all looking out for a financial return, but only an impact return, and then on the other hand, those who, though ready to take the risk of impact investing and not looking out primarily for financial return would still consider that an investment should be an investment and that there should also be a financial return. We think it is important for several reasons. One, on the one hand, of course, the fact to bring in people who, with a more traditional investing approach, may provide projects with certain characteristics which may also be an element of success. But then on the other hand, of course, and that's certainly the primary reason, we are aware of the fact that for many undertakings, more funding is required, and that purely the only donation money or only purely philanthropic funds will not allow us to achieve the results which we want to obtain, and therefore we think that there should be possibility for those who promote this type of impact projects that they should also have access to financial resources which are not purely philanthropic. We are working on a structure which would be legally a traditional commercial company. One could choose the different types of commercial companies which exist under Luxembourg law, but then add up on those several characteristics which the company has to meet in order to be awarded the label of the impact company, and then also to get certain of the benefits of that. The idea is two groups of shareholders: the impact investors, no return, but possibility to recoup their investment after at the end of the project. And then on the other hand, financial or return investors who are allowed to get a return of the project, but only a return if the social objective, if the impact objectives of the project have been achieved. That means you can engage in such a project only if you are ready to take the risk and if you agree with the impact investors on the objectives which you want to reach in common, and you must accept that only if together you achieve those impact objectives, only then you can also earn a financial report. The project is, I think, going on not too bad. It is not yet at the level of Parliament, but we have it's presently looked at as the Ministère de l'Économie Solidaire, and we hope that we will get it on the legal process during this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Corinne, Molitor, and Marc Elvinger for their presentation. Welcome to everybody. I'm Laura Foschi, and I'm Head of Research and Development at ADA. And I joined ADA only 2 months ago, and Luxembourg only 2 months ago. I heard a lot about Midi de la Microfinance. This is my first Midi de la Microfinance. And I was so curious to participate because I heard really a good impression about that, but I never thought that my first participation in the Midi de la Microfinance would be on this side of the table, actually. So thank you very much for your warm welcome. For those this Midi de la Microfinance is dedicated to impact investing, and it is organized in strict collaboration with the Banque de Luxembourg and with the kind support of Luxembourg Development Corporation. For those who experienced microfinance and social business in developing countries, impact investing represents really a challenging subject. Impact investments address to high and demonstrable impact businesses that can help communities and people to solve social problems, to get out of poverty, or to provide products or solutions that are really environmental friendly. Additionally, they generate financial return. For its mission, impact investment can be considered as a real complementary tool or a step forward for philanthropy and development cooperation. Microfinance is one of the pioneer sectors in which impact investment has invested in the past and still invest in nowadays. And but what impact investors are looking for, and what impact business can record and can report. This is the question that we will face today, and we will try to answer with our speakers. I would like to welcome to our speakers Professor Hummels, who is the European Liaison Officer of the Global Impact Investing Network, known as GIIN from everybody, that is a non-profit organization dedicated to increasing the scale and the effectiveness of impact investing, and Dr. Carmen von Nell-Breuning from Ernst Young. I would also like to thank Elvinger Hoss Prussen and Ernst Young for that they have supported this Midi de la Microfinance according with the topic of today. Last but not least, thanks for the precious collaboration of Alfie and LuxFlag. And I will also mention that twice a year, the Midi de la Microfinance is organized in collaboration with the Raiffeisen Foundation of Belgium, BRS, and for this reason, this conference took place in Brussels last week. And I give the floor to Professor Hummels.
Thank you, Laura. Let me see how this works. That's where we start. Thank you. Bantere. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited about seeing so many people who are really interested in impact investing. And I would really thank the Banque de Luxembourg, Corinne, and Ada for organizing this event on something that is important to me, not only as a representative of the Global Impact Investing Network, but slightly also for your information, I am an impact investor. I'm also affiliated, I'm managing director of SNS Impact Investing. And for instance, to give you an idea, we manage some 400 million euros in microfinance, coming all from institutional investors. And I would like to share some thoughts about those institutional investors today with you. And I've chosen as a title, Pantarei, Everything Flows, Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, and the growth of impact investing. Everything flows. I'll come back to that later. But I would like to start actually on the day that we all celebrate the inauguration of Pope Francis with a short story on institutional investing and the poor. It is actually quite intriguing that we now have a new Pope who has chosen the name Francis. If that refers to Francis from Assisi, which is not a necessity, there's also a Francis Xaverius. But if it refers to Francis of Assisi, that's quite intriguing, because that Francis was certainly dedicated to improving the lives of the poor. So what better could you have than someone who is really understanding what we are talking about today, impact investing. And my story takes you not to the Roman Catholic Church, but I would like to take you to a small church. Imagine a small church in the Netherlands, where I recently was and actually heard the minister talk about microfinance, and that was quite intriguing. I was simply listening to his sermon, And suddenly he referred to his personal experiences. He had made a journey to Kenya, and he then found out that his pension fund was actually investing there through the SNS Institutional Microfinance Funds, which is something that I manage. So I had that immediate recognition of, hey, that's interesting. He's talking about something that we do. And he was really proud of that. And that was quite intriguing, I can tell you, that he was proud about the fact that his pension fund was particularly addressing the issues of the poor. And that made him really feel good. Ladies and gentlemen, wouldn't it be nice indeed that we could all make some decent money, while at the same time creating a better world? That is basically what impact investing is all about. Creating a better world while making a decent return, financial return. And particularly for that pension fund of the Dutch ministers in the Protestant church, it was very important that both aspects were there. And I'll come back to that later. It is something, of course, that you are all familiar with. Many of you are working in the microfinance space, so you know a little bit about that, or in other spaces, healthcare, for instance, renewable energy, all those topics that are relevant for impact investors because ultimately they help to create a better world. And that already happens. NGOs, development finance institutions, etc., they are all already foundations very much working on that notion of impact investing. And recently we have seen other players come to the market, and sometimes you could question their motives. Banks are currently very interested in something like impact investing. Pension funds, insurance companies. I really think that Banque de Luxembourg is probably is an organization that has integrated it into its philosophy. It's part of the identity of the bank. But if you compare that to, for instance, ING, ABN AMRO, UBS, etc., you sometimes become a little bit skeptical with regard to their motives. Nevertheless, there is apparently also a demand from clients. But boosting their image, if that is the only reason, you should become a little bit wary about why they're doing it and what they're actually doing. Nevertheless, I think it is a good thing that institutional investors, private money, is coming to this market. And there's a very simple, pragmatic reason for that. If we currently look in this economic climate to what is happening out there, we can simply witness the fact that there is too little money available for all kinds of social purposes. The governments are basically withdrawing money. My own minister in the Netherlands for development aid basically declared it dead 2 weeks ago. She basically said development aid is something of the past. What is new and what is important is that we invest for impact in that development space. I can tell you, I disagree with her. I fully disagree with her. Impact investing is very important, but it cannot do the job on its own. But at the same time, indeed, I agree with her that development aid as such, money being spent from public resources to development aid, also has its limitations. There is simply too little money available. And if we want to actually further the interest of the poor, for instance, we definitely have to come up with something that is sustainable, that has impact, and is coming from private resources. I'm sometimes forgetting that I also have a few slides, but okay, I'm back where I want to be. And that is basically, what are we talking about? Marc posed actually two questions. What is it, and what is it for? And let's start with what it is. Quite simple, actually. It is investments intended to create positive impact beyond financial returns. So it's both. It is focusing on financial returns, but there's much more, and that's the social side of it, or the environmental side of it, for that matter, or the cultural side, or whatever kind of positive impact you think of. And it refers to the allocation of financial resources then to, as it says, a broad spectrum of social and environmental objectives, and I'm mentioning here a few examples. Affordable housing, healthcare, clean water, education, small and medium enterprise, particularly small and medium enterprises, is quite intriguing. And the European Commission is also very dedicated indeed in stimulating private investment into small and medium enterprise space, also for impact, not only simply making the economics work, but also with a positive social return. And of course, microfinance, of course, which is impact investing avant la lettre, I would say. But I might come back to that. But to be more precise, actually, this is a definition, but there's more to say about it if you basically say that these are investments intended to create a positive impact beyond financial returns. What do we say then? Intentions are important because, indeed, they are intended to have that positive impact. And it's not only the investor who has certain intentions, because you always invest in something. And that means that the investee also must be aware of the fact that you're doing this for other reasons than only financial reasons. And my experience, even in the area of microfinance, is that microfinance institutions not always are on the same page as we are. Sometimes, if you talk to managers of microfinance institutions, they simply want to earn money, which is, of course, their good right, and it does make sense. But is that the only thing that they do? So we have to have a kind of a dialogue with the investee also on his motives to be investing in something like, whether it's microfinance, renewable energy, healthcare, or whatever. So intentions do matter. Second, creating a positive impact implies the ability to measure that impact. And ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you that is a lot of work. And it is very difficult. Because actually, impact means that you make an investment, and those investments leads to certain outputs. For instance, how many microfinance clients do you serve? That's a clear output. Then if you also look at whether microfinance leads to improving their lives, you're talking about what in the academic world is called the outcomes. And then finally, you want to know whether your impact investment has actually been causal in creating those outcomes. And that is impact. And that attribution between investment and ultimately that idea of creating those outcomes, yeah, that is very tough, I can tell you. It's very difficult to measure that. Many of you are probably very aware of the so-called randomized controlled trials, where studies have been conducted, for instance, in Hyderabad or in other cities, where two institutions have been compared, one with an intervention, one without, and then it's a social experiment. Very intriguing, very difficult to measure, because it is social reality, and you cannot keep social reality completely under control. So these are very tough things to measure. Nevertheless, if you call yourself an impact investor, you have at least the duty to try to measure something like impact. All right. And finally, focusing on financial returns, going beyond, Mark already mentioned it, going beyond philanthropy. Yes. So that is basically what we're talking about. And now, to make it very clear, I'm missing a... That's too bad. Oh, this is the old presentation. Oh, I'm missing an example. I wanted to give you an example of the Hoxton Hotel in London, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. That is an investment by a company called Bridges Ventures. Bridges Ventures is the for impact investment company of Sir Ronald Cohen. He was previously the chairman of Apex, a very large hedge fund. And he thought, okay, I can do more than simply having a hedge fund. I can create some value for society. So he set up, together with a few colleagues, Bridges Ventures. And they invested, for instance, in the Hoxton Hotel. The Hoxton Hotel is a hotel in Hackney. That's East London. And it's quite intriguing. It is actually a former car park, and they turned it into a hotel. It's a bit of a deprived, a rundown area, but they created this fantastic hotel where they hired the local people who were actually not in a position normally to have great jobs. It is a deprived area, it's an underserved area, and now there was this opportunity for people to get employment. So 73% of the wage bill remains in that deprived area. The same counts for the suppliers. The hotel works with local suppliers from the area. 85% of all the expenses on supplies go to that specific area. So it creates an enormous boost. The hotel is a real success from a financial point of view, but at the same time, it creates added value for society there. And that is basically what impact investing is all about, I would say. Right. Now, coming back to that slide, making a world a better place, because, as I said, there is simply not sufficient public capital available. So that's why it is a good thing that private investors, whether they be foundations, high net worth individuals, family offices, pension funds, insurance companies, banks, etc., whether they come in. That is so important because there's too little to make workable and to deploy that to the area coming from public sources. And what is important and what sometimes the critics of impact investing do forget is ultimately that we can only achieve our social objectives with the help of private capital. It is not conceivable in this situation anymore that we can simply do it, that our governments are providing the money, that multilateral organizations are providing the money, even though they play an important role, or that development finance institutions play that role. Private capital is needed if we want to create that better place. So that is very important, but I want to pay attention to something that I call the financial supply chain. Normally, and particularly in an area of small and medium enterprise investment, with a very positive social return, as Marc just mentioned with regard to the Société d'Impact, a very creative concept, and I really hope that the Luxembourg Parliament is adopting that notion. It makes you a leader in the field, I think, if you can get this through Parliament. So that is a structure, but it's not available yet. So what is currently happening it all starts, if you have a small and medium enterprise innovation, it usually starts with the 4 Fs. It's either family, friends, foundations, or fools that provide you the capital. The 4 Fs. That's where it all starts. And but it only works if, at a certain point in time, those initial investors can actually pass on the baton to the next investor in line, where ultimately that financial exit of one investor creates a great opportunity for the next one. And because it all starts with that private high-risk capital, but ultimately we want to have other types of capital, like private debt, and maybe even after a certain period of time, private equity, venture capital, and then maybe even going to public debt or public equity. That is basically a chain of... We're all familiar with the notion of the supply chain, the regular supply chain in the business world, but there is something out here that is really intriguing, and we have to organize that financial supply chain. That's not there at this point in time. So one of the things that Luxembourg can contribute to, and I think that the discussions with Elfi and within Elfi are focusing on that. How can we create a marketplace in which impact investors in the various stages of the financial supply chain can meet each other, can exchange ideas, but certainly can do deals? I really encourage the Luxembourg financial industry to pick that up and to take that to the next level. Right. That was the financial supply chain. So making investment sense, because if you want to integrate pension funds, insurance companies, private banks, etc., into this realm, you basically have to be aware of the rules of the game they work with. So I only work with institutional investors, and they have certain rules, that certain practices, certain structures, etc., they work with. So starting with the observation that if you are a high net worth individual or a family office or a foundation, there are plenty of opportunities to invest for impact. There are already a lot of funds. Corinne just told me that here in Luxembourg only there are already 60 impact investment funds available. That's fantastic. So, but the question is, are they also suited for investments coming from the institutional investors? And if we really want to create some positive effect or impact in our world at large, we definitely need those larger institutional investors to come in. But then there are a couple of problems or barriers. The first is, as you can see, the size of the investments. Usually, the investors I've worked with, the largest pension funds, among the largest pension funds in Europe, they are not getting out of their beds if the investment funds they want to invest in do not exceed the amount of assets under management of, let's say, 100 million euros. But 100 million euros is quite a lot of money for all the innovative stuff that we are talking about. So that immediately creates an issue. And for the larger ones, like, for instance, APG, at least one of the largest investors in Europe, they don't get out of their beds if the fund is not approximately in the area of 200 to 300 million. So that size of the investment opportunities is really an issue. Second issue is the cost of the investments. If you look at current offering of most impact investments, you would probably find that 200 basis points of management fee is quite normal. If they are also working in the private equity space, then you have the regular 2+20 structure. In the current situation where also these large investors are looking at cost, they won't accept that anymore. To give you an idea, we already 6 years ago, when we started our microfinance funds, worked with a management fee of 1.7%, 170 basis points. That's still among the lowest in the market for professional investors. Still, many microfinance funds are way beyond that. So cost is an issue, and particularly costs are always related to the returns that you're making. So if the returns are high, costs are not an issue, but if the returns are under pressure, and they are currently under pressure, then the costs have to come down. So what an involvement from these institutional investors also implies is actually that there is a drive towards more efficiency, market discipline, all that kind of stuff that these investors bring to the market. And that is it's also an advantage. It brings a professional attitude to the market that we all can benefit from. Thirdly, complexity of products. If I even look at my own microfinance funds, we work with independent investment managers that invest in microfinance institutions, and those institutions ultimately invest in microfinance entrepreneurs. How more complex can you get it? That's highly intransparent, that complete chain of events. So that is quite an issue. Complexity is something that institutional investors do not very much like. Then there is a second thing here, and that has to do with the quality of service. Because if you look at the landscape, most of the providers, the fund managers that offer these products, these investment products, are small boutiques. And I love small boutiques, but small boutiques are not always equipped to work with institutional investors, because what these institutional investors require is actually very stringent risk management. They have all kinds of procedures, etc., stress tests. You have to be able to live up to the high expectations coming from those investors, and many boutiques simply cannot do that. Not yet. It will be in the near future. And finally, the assurance of impact. I already mentioned that measuring impact is quite a difficult issue. And how can you assure to those investors that actually the money that they invested actually is influencing the lives of, for instance, the poor in the various emerging markets in which they invest, is actually improving? Is that particularly, Mark asked the question, what for? What is the objective that microfinance is really interested in? Some are interested, yes, I'll shut up in a minute or so. Yeah, that's quite unfortunate. Mark basically asked, but what for? And one of the questions is, if you are a microfinance fund, you could, for instance, invest because you want to alleviate poverty, what Laura already mentioned, but you can have other objectives. Another objective could, for instance, be that you simply want to provide access to finance to the poor, those who did not have access to finance before. And as Amartya Sen, one of our renowned economists, once said, ultimately what it's all about is development as freedom. I want to be free. I want to make my own decisions. That's much more important. So I don't want someone to alleviate my poverty. I would simply want to have access to finance in order for me as a client to decide what I can and what I cannot. Finally, you could also have the objective to simply integrate microfinance into the general financial system, the global financial system. So what for is a good question, and relates to this issue, the assurance of impact. Very briefly on the way forward, as I mentioned before, I think it's a good thing that institutional investors enter the market. They bring private capital, they bring discipline, efficiency, and scale. They will not replace public capital, but it's an important addition to it. And what is probably is needed is the creation of a supply chain in which various investors have a role based on the principle of additionality. Right, coming to the end, actually coming back to the Protestant minister, I think he was proud for the right reasons. He really felt that his pension fund did something good to the people in Kenya, where he could see what they had done. At the same time, he could also have been proud of his pension fund actually giving a signal to the market that institutional investors do care. You don't have to be a cynic to look at all these large financial institutions and only think that they're in it for the money. Yes, they need good, solid financial returns. And that makes sense because it's our pensions that are at stake. And we don't want our pension funds and the boards of our pension funds to simply gamble with our money. So it makes sense to be prudent on the side of the board. Prudence is very important. So having said that, the fact that within that framework of prudence, that his pension fund actually made a positive contribution to social improvement for the poor, actually made him proud, and shows that institutional investors have something to look for in that world of impact investing. At the same time, we have to be a little bit wary, as I already said. We have to be wary about the fact that we have to prevent that too much money is chasing too few opportunities. That is very important. Coming back to the Pope. Actually, I was really intrigued by this Pope. If we talk about one institutional investor that could make a hell of a change, I think it's the Catholic Church. It's among the largest investors in the world. They have a lot of capital. I've worked for a lot of congregations, etc., Catholic financial institutions. They call themselves churches or congregations, but they are financial institutions, I can tell you. And so the Roman Catholic Church is one of the wealthiest organizations in the world. And nobody knows the NAV of their assets. But if this Pope really means what he expresses by his name, I think he can really make a difference. If he invests that money for the poor, he will certainly make that difference and re-establish the reputation of the Mother Church. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Time passes very quickly, and let me now open to questions and answers, and we can collect some questions and make the first round of answers. And please raise your hand if you want to contribute. So, yes. First. Oops.
I begin?
Yes.
I have a little problem with the definition, because it's not every investment, investment wants to have an impact.
Yeah.
If a big company is building an oil refinery in Greece, is it impact investing?
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And this, monsieur? And it's in the middle, so I think that we are obliged to... Yes.
Thank you. Philip Thomas, I'm writing for a German insurance magazine. The question is, what is the trade-off between the normally targeted return on investment, which could be, say, 15% in a developing country, and the social impact? So what part of the targeted investment should investors give up in order to achieve impact, and at what level of a given up return would this qualify as social investment? So say 15% is the target, would the investors have to give up 5 percentage points out of that in order to qualify? Is there a way to qualify it, or is there a bit of a gray area between a purely profit-minded investment and something which is also looking after social impact? The second aspect is, what about foreign currency exposure? Who's going to wear that? Because most of the investments would be targeting developing nations, and it's anyone's guess how those currencies are going to develop. So should the institutions in those countries borrow or accept equity in a foreign currency, in which case they bear the currency risk, or should the investors bear it? Thank you.
Very good questions.
Sorry, you can. It's from the other side. You will have to, perhaps.
Hi, my name is Nathalie Close. I have a question. You were speaking about a website, impactbase.org, and when I saw that, I thought, okay, but how do they select the impact investment, possible impact investment? And it comes to a second question, which is about the definition of impact investment, because we all define impact investment as a social or environmental one, but if you go beyond those two words, what is real social impact or an environmental impact? Because, I mean, it can be everything and anything. So, thank you.
Can answer for this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Two questions on the definition, indeed. Isn't every investment an impact investment? It can be, and but it depends, and that's why I provided that sheet to be more precise. And I said, okay, but if you are an impact investor, you first have to say something about your intentions. If you don't have an intention to be an impact investor, then it's apparently a regular investment. Second, if you are defining yourself as an impact investor, then you put the burden on yourself to show what that impact is. So measuring that impact is then crucial. And if you are not able to communicate and measure that impact, then ultimately it becomes very difficult to sustain that claim that you're an impact investor. And that comes right back to your question. Isn't there a normative framework available for deciding what is impact and what not? Because if you look behind those names, social and environmental, what is there? And who decides? Ultimately, I'm quite liberal. And that's why I really believe that disclosure will ultimately help to decide what is really impact and what not. If there is there's no council ultimately that, or a judge or whatever, that is able to decide whether an impact investment is for impact or not. You will probably have your ideas with regard to certain microfinance investments as being really interesting from an impact point of view, while others might simply be qualified to you as regular investments, but okay, made in local financial institutions that call themselves microfinance institutions. So it's up to the investor and the investee to show what kind of impact is involved here. And we can have a debate on whether or not this is for impact or not, because there is no single entity that is able to decide whether an investment is either an impact investment or not. Ultimately, we decide that as a community. And that's intriguing. That's what I believe in, because that also leads to something that I started with, Pantare, everything flows. Because of the dynamics that we create, because of the dialogue and the interaction we will have, we will ultimately define what is impact and what not. But there is not a certification agency that, or an auditor that is able to really define what is impact and what not. It's the same as with responsible investing. Who decides what is responsible? Actually, I always say responsible investing is that what is defined by the provider of a certain product, because that provider of that certain product is going to tell you how he or she has defined responsibility. Same counts for impact investing. Third question, actually third and fourth, trade-off between normal IRR. Is there a certain percentage that you can? The answer is like-minded, compared to what I just said. There's no clear criterion on when an impact investment is meeting the criteria, the financial criteria. So a 15% IRR can well be an impact investment, while at the same time a 10% IRR impact investment in, for instance, something like microfinance could be way too much and could have negative downturns and could not be considered to be an impact investment. Both can be the case. So if I look, for instance, at a fund, an international fund for health in Africa, which makes 20 plus returns, that could easily be a very good impact investment, because it's always about the risk-adjusted returns we're talking about. So they're taking a lot of risk and are being rewarded for their risk-taking, and while at the same time they contribute something to the health of people in Africa, and that is therefore, it is an impact investment. So there is no clear line where you can say, okay, you have to give up 5%, 1%. Maybe you don't have to give up anything to be called an impact investor. And then finally, the foreign currency exposure. Let me give you a very clear example. My own fund, as an institutional microfinance fund, accepts 50% current loans that are in foreign currencies, so local currencies. 50% is made probably in euros and mostly in dollars, and the only risk that we hedge is ultimately the dollar risk. All the other local currency risks are not hedged. We take the risk as an investor, not the investee, because you're completely right. It would be transferring the risk to the local investees, and that would be unacceptable.
Right. Is there any other question? We have time for one or two.
Hartfish, Vega, NGO. To measure the impact, even in our parallel world of the NGOs, one notion that becomes stronger and stronger is that part of the impact has to be the creation of an income-generating activity. But strangely enough, this notion makes a lot of sense to the investor, but sometimes not to the beneficiary, whereas they are, in the end, the ones who would benefit the most.
Which beneficiary are you precisely thinking of?
The countries in which the projects have been created.
Oh, yeah.
Very often they're not used to that notion of generating income.
That is true, and that leads to ultimately a higher risk exposure, because if it's not generating income, then it's probably used for consumption, and then ultimately as an investor you are more exposed to that specific risk. And it's something, that's why it's important that we ultimately lead to or discuss and develop principles with regard to over-indebtedness, because this might easily lead to something like over-indebtedness, and that's not something that we want to be involved in. So we actually stimulate our microfinance institutions in which we invest to endorse the client protection principles, to be very transparent about what they're actually investing in and who they are providing. We are very supportive of the creation of credit bureaus, because there needs to be much more information on the client profiles and ultimately whether these clients can ultimately pay back these loans they take. Because if it's not income generating, they might get into trouble. And that's not something we would like to happen.
Kasper Wanslem, Luxembourg Microfinance and Development Fund. I wanted to ask you about your experience during the last 5 to 10 years in terms of the output, outcome, impact debate you see on the level of your investors. How much more sophisticated, how much more demanding are they becoming?
Hi. What kind of new capabilities will be asked to a relationship manager to be able to make the link between the profile of your customer and the financial product? So it's important that that we are able in our day-to-day job to make the right connections. Thank you.
Very good.
And the last one, I think. Thank you.
Christopher China from Ernst Young. What is your view on the metrics debate about the reduction of complexity, about the fact that we try to have metrics that are very efficient, such as profit in the for-profit world, and maybe less costly for the one who measures those, and the risk to forget important aspects of the complexity of.
Sorry, I didn't hear that last part of your question.
This compared to the risk to forget various dimensions that constitute impact and its inherent complexity, actually.
Yeah. First, let me start with Kasper's question. The demand for impact information on the side of the investors. There's a long way to go. Because investors are particularly interested. Investors are always forward-looking. So they do want to know, and it probably touches a bit on the question that Christoph was also asking. They're forward-looking. So what do they want to know? They really want to know whether they are on the right path towards creating some positive returns for the investees and the risks involved in that. But what they don't want to know is precisely how to measure that impact that they have, or do more comprehensive studies on. They simply don't have the means for that. They don't have the money, so they leave it up to universities, etc., and that makes sense. They will read those studies, and I can certainly recommend the Duflo and Banerjee book on poor economics. Fantastic. So there are researchers that write very good books that we can learn a lot from, but the investors themselves, they are simply reputation driven on this one. What's the banana skin that I can slip on if I'm not aware about the potential impact or the negative downsides of my investments? So with regard to microfinance investments, the Andhra Pradesh discussion, the Compartamos discussion, the Banex discussion in Nicaragua, they all have heard microfinance investment, and the institutional investors don't want to be associated with that. So that's the type of information they really look forward to receiving, and not so much the information on, are we really making progress? Is this really alleviating poverty or not? That's basically not what they're looking for. Second question, also a very interesting one, on the capabilities of the relationship managers. Do they have to understand and maybe even believe in the product they're selling? The latter thing is maybe not necessary, but I would recommend every relationship manager to really understand what he or she is selling and what he or she is actually delivering to the clients. Actually, within my own company, I had a relationship manager for quite a while, and he could sell everything. He could even sell his mother-in-law. Fantastic. He could, but actually, that was precisely what he was missing, the understanding of what this was all about. If you don't understand what this specific product with all its characteristics, then you are simply not a good relationship manager. In my point of view, I wouldn't hire you if you are simply a good salesperson or good relationship manager, but without actually appreciating what we're doing in the realm of impact investing. So yes, it requires different capabilities. It requires a different kind of understanding. And if you don't have that, I wouldn't hire you. It's as simple as that. And the metrics question Christophe posed, yes, I really believe, yeah. It has taken us more than 200 years, I think, to come up with notions of profit, balance sheets, etc. So on the financial side, it has taken quite a while to come up with a decent set of metrics. And I'm very much in favor of decent metrics, but it will be a very difficult process before we come up with decent metrics that we can share. I know, for instance, that the European Investment Fund is currently launching a fund of funds, and they are developing a kind of methodology that I particularly like. They're working with impact multiples. So they know what money multiples are, but they have created a method they call the impact multiple. And so it's a comparison between the objectives and the achievements. And if you achieve more than basically what your objectives are, then you have a positive +1+ impact multiple. These ideas I love. It's very intriguing. Come up with those. But it's a long way to go. This is simply one initiative. We, for instance, have developed an Eye for Impact, a 2-pager that shows you what kind of progress the microfinance institutions make in which we invest, according to the principles for investors in inclusive finance. Also quite an interesting methodology, but very simple, again, but completely different than the impact multiple that the European Investment Fund is creating. So there is a lot of activity out there, taking indeed the upside as well as the risk into account. And it's all about ultimately coming to a process of standardization, and that will take quite a while, I'm afraid. I would say let's keep the pace up, and let's try to work with each other to share notes and to see what works.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all your contributions. And I know that Professor Hummels is very interesting, so we can take advantage of his presence during the lunchtime. So he wanted to hit, but actually he will not be able to do that. And before handing over to Dr. von Nell-Breuning, Let me thank all our speakers, Ernst Young and Elvinger Hoss Prussen for their support, the Banque de Luxembourg for its precious collaboration, and the Luxembourg Development Corporation for its kind support. And I would like to give a special thanks to all the journalists and the medias that have attended today for their effort in disseminating and making a leverage effect about the contents of the event today. Ada invites you, all of you, to the next Midi de la Microfinance here in the Banque de Luxembourg in June. And finally, let me introduce and thank once again Dr. Carmen von Nell-Breuning, and who I asked to present us with the key points of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very conscious of time and empty stomachs probably in this room, but nevertheless I would like to briefly conclude this I find very insightful Midi de la Microfinance and summarize some of the key ideas that we discussed and that were presented throughout the last hour. I believe the full room, the full house, and the number and the content of questions that were raised and discussed clearly show the interest in the field of impact investing and clearly show the awareness that we have that impact investing is important. This is good because indeed impact investing is important and it's going to be even more important in the future. We heard that in current times where public institutions and governments are indeed cutting back on their budget to fund social advancement, indeed it's time for private capital to come in. And the private capital, luckily enough, is coming in. What are the main challenges, however, that investors face today when they are looking at impact investing as an asset class in their overall asset allocation? Professor Hummels identified 4 main challenges that are particularly relevant to institutional investors. And I may briefly summarize these 4 main challenges again, which are, first, impact investments are usually small in size, and often too small to be considered in the asset allocation. They're usually costly because they are simply labor intensive. They are complex, and 4th point, very important, they obviously raise the question, the what for? What kind of impact has been achieved? Has the impact indeed been achieved? And how or can we measure the social impact? And obviously, I mean, in this context, we had a number of questions coming up, financial return versus social return, etc., etc. So it's one core point of consideration and probably also future research. In order to make the asset class impact investing grow in the future and to hopefully, at least to a certain extent, integrate impact investing in the mainstream financial system, according to Professor Hummels, what is needed? Impact investments need to increase in scale, and impact investments need to be supported by a strong infrastructure. And strong infrastructure, including aspects on reporting, transparency, disclosure, very important, and infrastructure also referring to a standardization of the currently existing different tools to measure the impact achieved. And last but not least, such infrastructure also needs to give the framework in which investors and investees can collaborate, can exchange ideas, can have a dialogue along and throughout the financial supply chain. So to summarize, finance indeed has a role to play, private capital has a role to play, and can bring huge support to impact investments activities on the ground. From a Luxembourg perspective, I may conclude that we at European Impact Investing Luxembourg, together with ALFI, together with LuxFlag, indeed work hard to support impact investing as an asset class and to build also a kind of infrastructure really that actually brings the support to impact investing. Thank you very much for having attended this Midi de la Microfinance. The buffet is open. You're all kindly invited to stay to profit or benefit of Professor Hummels' attendance and enjoy the lunch. Thank you.